My request to Syed Veqar Islam to please join us on the head table. Veqar is the CEO and Director of Jaffer Business Systems. So over to you, Veqar.
I think we are ready to start. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, Asfar. Thank you, Nutshell Forum, for having us to have this dialogue on public-private partnership. Public-private partnership is a topic which has been at the forefront for a few decades now. This actually came to limelight in a significant way when Margaret Thatcher, former Prime Minister of United Kingdom, accelerated the development of infrastructure and social sector using what they affectionately called P3 model or public-private partnership model. And since then, many countries have followed suit, many with some degree of success, and it has had its fair share of failures as well. But notwithstanding success or the failures, all the top consulting companies of the world agree that if we want to accelerate development, infrastructure development, and social development, public-private partnership is the way to go. Boston Consulting Group, in its report, talks about the fact that when you combine public-private partnership, it bridges the gap between financing needs as well as the delivery needs. So when you bring in the private sector and the public sector together, the financing need as well as the delivery needs are bridged. McKinsey is a lot more direct in its statement about public-private partnership and says an optimal mix of public, private, and social sector, so they bring in the social sector as well, will not just accelerate the infrastructure development, but it can produce magic when all three combine together compared to even the most determined effort made by one or two of the sectors. So think about the partnership model these consultants are emphasizing. Harvard Business Review, while is a lot more measured when they make a statement, but at the same time, they have given the key success criteria for making public-private partnership work, and they say that at the heart or at the crux of public-private partnership is a very simple yet something very difficult to construct. And it is about each individual party committed and determined to achieving the goal of the others exactly like they are committed to achieving their goal. And that's the key to success for a public-private partnership. So in the next 30 minutes, we'll try and uncover what public-private partnership means, what are some of the key success criteria that one needs to be aware of, and also look at some of the success models from economies like Pakistan, because many of the people saying it cannot work in countries like Pakistan, and see, is it a myth or is it a reality? So we'll try and unearth that. So we have someone who is at the midst of some of the major P3 projects, as they say, and he's someone who can not just talk about with his wisdom and experience, but also someone who has gone through the process. So Aurangzeb sir, very good to have you, sir. Thank you very much. So let's start, and I would like to, if you can give a quick view from your viewpoint, how do you define a public-private partnership framework? And in your view, what are some of the key criteria that governments and private sector, for that matter, social sector needs to be aware of getting into this kind of partnership? So over to you, sir.
Thank you, Veqar. Quite frankly, you have teed it up very well. Now, public-private partnership, is essentially supposed to be a win-win situation. Now, to get to that win-win situation, what does the two parties actually bring to the table? So on the private sector side, obviously, it's efficiency, it's their expertise, it's their capital. On the public sector side, it's normally the sort of the regulatory framework, the concessionary framework, and the concessions which have to be put into place. And normally it works very well because most of the governments have their, the fiscal space is tight, budgetary allocations are difficult, and that's where the private sector comes in to sort of play that role. Now, what we've seen before we actually come to Pakistan, in some of the other markets where I worked, Australia, fantastic example. I mean, there it is hygiene. Nothing moves in the infrastructure space other than the public-private space. South Korea is another fine example of which have gone into that place and space and done very well. Now, ultimately, it's a few things which need to come together, right? So it starts with having a shared vision and commonality of objectives. And I will keep on coming back to the same theme, the same themes in some of the examples when we talk about those later on. And then post the objective setting and vision setting, it's ultimately the mutual respect and trust of the two partners. And we have to all have to respect where the other sides are coming from. Private sector ultimately will have to think about the bottom line. The public sector, apart from their own fiscal discussion, etc., are, at times things might go slow, at times it might just go fast track, but also the private sector party needs to be very clear that the public sector is accountable to a number of stakeholders, and therefore they will have to take a lot of people along, which creates its own space and challenges. But if all of this comes together, it can be a real win-win formula.
Thank you very much. Great summary. So you talked about, and I picked two key words. One is hygiene, which is the Australian example. And that's very profound because hygiene means it doesn't move. And it has to move correctly as we go ahead with the infrastructure and social sector development. And you also spoke about shared objectives, which is exactly what McKinsey also spoke about, that you need to have a common objective to go forward. And now let's look at, we'll try and unearth some of the sectors where P3 has played a role, and we'll of course take Pakistan example, but the examples are many in developing economies of the world. But we'll cover at least 3 distinct sectors from Pakistan and see if we have a success model that exists in this country and, or for that matter, can be replicated in other economies of the world to take the discussion forward. So, talking about shared objective, talking about hygiene, one project that comes to my mind immediately talked about is coming up as a great success story is in the energy sector and industrialization, and that's the third coal project. Good to see Khalid Mansoor sitting here. So would you like to talk about that?
Yeah, sure. So let's start with the infrastructure space. You're right. I mean, most of the public-private discussion and authority and P3 regimes are in the power sector and the mining sector and roads and transportation sector. But the one that you pick up, right, which is SECMEC, again, I would sort of talk about this Sindh Engro coal mining project, because that's what it is, which is an indigenous coal project. But let's start again with that framework in mind. What were the objectives where the private sector and the federal government and the Sindh government, they shared that vision? First was that it is the production of indigenous coal, but with a view that it allows the electricity generation cost to go down, number one. Number two, the country import bill going down, because this is indigenous fuel, and therefore we don't have to focus on and get imported coal. So that's one aspect of it. The second vision and the objective was the overall development of that region, the Thar region, the socio-economic impact in that region, and how it's going to change the lives of the people in that region. And so with that shared vision, I mean, if I see, let's start with the parties, right? So Khalid is sitting here as HBL, right? I mean, fantastic partners. I thought Yas was here earlier with Engro. So absolutely world-class private sector expertise. And if I may throw in HBL in there as well, because we came in as an equity partner, but also a debt provider in this project as well. And then, of course, CMC themselves, the Chinese company. And then if you see the federal government, they've brought in the regulatory structure. I think it was a very effective concessionary framework which was put into place. And then the role of the Sindh government was absolutely amazing. Not only just as an equity provider, but all the ancillary infrastructure development which went in and around this project. So the road infrastructure, airport, water, and water sort of treatment plant, Sindh government almost spent $700 million on this sort of ancillary project. And as you said, it's a project which is up and running. It's a fantastic example of how PPP can actually work in the country. And if you look at how it has improved the lives of the people in and around it. More employment, there's more accessibility, better living conditions, and the training. And the women there were trained to actually drive the trucks, which would do the coal transportation. So I do think it's a very, very fine example of how things should work, and a great example of P3 working in Pakistan.
Thank you very much. So I come back to your earlier point on shared objective, on hygiene, and I also picked up a couple of other points that you raised. So typically when we talk about public-private partnership, one of the concerns that you keep reading and hearing about is the fact that the moment private sector comes in, the cost goes up. And interestingly, you talk about the cost actually coming down, and also the import bill coming down when the private sector came up, and both the private sector, the provincial government, and how federal government, they all combine together to achieve a shared objective, which is the well-being of the people. And the last aspect, which is also extremely important that you brought up, which is about how people in that remote area saw their living standard go up, and they saw development for possibly the first time in that region because of this partnership. That's the power of partnership that Aurangzeb is speaking about, and also what I discussed in my introduction. So we talked about the framework, which stays constant as you are hearing. We talked about how it brings improvement in infrastructure development, how it brings speed when we talked about the Thar coal project. Now let's see, does it affect the poor of any society? And can the model work to alleviate poverty, to alleviate the sufferings of the lowest strata of our society? Just for everyone to know, World Bank in its report says that out of close to 7 billion global population, 800 million are without electricity. And that's about 15% of the global population. Now, if that doesn't move some of us, then think about good 31% of the global population is without water or without managed drinking water. So that's about 2.2 billion people. So that's the kind of work that needs to happen in a space which is for the lower strata of society. And let's see if there is an example. On that front, in the social sector, again in developing economies like Pakistan, and we recently saw, and Dr. Shafqat Mahmood Sahab also spoke about it, about the recent distribution of over 15 billion rupees to the poor of this country using the ISAS program. So it would be great, because Habib Bank, I know, was one of the key element of the whole structure. So it would be great to talk about that and the benefit that it offered to the people.
Yeah, I think it's great that actually already real partners, some of those partners are sitting here. So Khalid could relate to the Sindh Engro, and Mr. Bajwa is sitting there on Alfla side, so he can relate to what we went through on the ISAS emergency cash program together. So listen, I mean, it's again a great example of public-private partnership. The BISP program was always there to focus on the women beneficiaries. In comes COVID and the stuff that you just mentioned in terms of people getting jobless, and we have the statistics, number of people, unfortunately, who went below the poverty line. So under the Prime Minister's initiative and Dr. Sania and her team leading from the front, it was quite clear that we need to make some disbursements to the needy, but with two conditions. And that's where the commonality of objectives come in. One is it has to be speedy. And number two, where the team from the government side was absolutely relentless, that has to be transparent. It has to go to the beneficiaries where it belongs. I mean, irrespective of the government affiliations, etc. So we had to scale up. So the two partners, which were HBL and Bank Al-Falah, we had to scale up very, very quickly, because this was about reaching millions of beneficiaries. And that's where our expertise, our scale, our network, our branchless banking brands all came into play, because it was not only our own network, but quite frankly, thousands of agents who are, when we talk about agents, these are mom and pop stores. Ye Kiryana ke stores jahan we can go and do small transactions. So we had to scale up very, very quickly. And so it was all, again, coming back to that shared vision, shared objective in terms of what we need to do, and then mutual trust and respect. And that doesn't mean, Veqar, I have to say, we had some very, and since Atif is sitting here, he can also allude to that, we had some very interesting discussions, right? There was some very interesting decision points which came through over the last 5 to 6 months, how we need to tweak, what were their government's expectations, what we could deliver in what point in time. So, it's not always hunky-dory, but as long as you are clear about the decision-making process and mutually trust and respect each other. And as a result of that, again, by the time we were done, at least through HBL, we had dispersed over 175 billion rupees and to close to 12 million beneficiaries. And when we talk about 12 million beneficiaries, you have to think about an average household of about 5 to 6 people. So this is about 60 million plus. If you put the two banks together, about 80 million plus. So this reached roughly 1/3 of the country's population. And the way it was all scaled up and the way it was executed, I think, again, a very fine example outside the infrastructure space, in the social space, in terms of public-private partnership.
I mean, it's overwhelming, especially during COVID times when many of us were not just struggling with our work, and alhamdulillah, many of the people sitting here are from the blessed portion of the society, but the poor were really suffering. And imagine the speed, imagine the transparency. But while staying on the subject of this cash disbursement, I do want to bring one more angle through this public-private partnership, because it's about what technology can do to achieve transparency, to achieve speed, and to also achieve the goal of financial inclusion. So if you can just bring that angle into this, how technology helped us reach the goal of 12 million people, good possibly 60 million people affected by it, and how it helped us gain speed, financial inclusion, and getting more people to get connected with the government in a way like never before.
Yeah, no, I think my worthy peers are going to come in, and in their financial panel, I'm sure they will touch upon it. But if we look back at 2020, right, it will always be remembered as a year with the ultimate black swan event, right? But it's also a year in which digital and technology became hygiene. And I say that because, of course, all of us as institutions were on our digital journeys. But I, again, on a webinar said yesterday as well, and it's someone else's quote, not what I have said, that there are decades where nothing happens, and then there are weeks when decades happen. And that's exactly what we have seen in terms of the client acceptability and in terms of what this country needed in terms of, and we saw that sort of in real uptick and step change in the digital space and digital transactions. I mean, everything that went on there with respect to, and we have to thank Nadra in that space as well, in terms of these biometric devices, where you could get into real-time checking of the individual, whether it's the right beneficiary or not, and at the same time, real-time sanction screening. Because let's not forget, we are living in a world of FATF, where AML and CTF and all of that becomes very, very important. So it was both, and without technology and without this digital enablement, we could not have carried out things at this scale before we could have gone ahead with disbursement.
Again, a great example, how technology was used, how 12 million people got positively affected when the P3 model was put into good use, and goes back to the framework that Aurangzeb spoke about at the beginning, that it's all about shared objective. And it's also all about, while many people talk about businesses have the objective of making money, yes, it does. But businesses all around the world have moved one step further, and everyone exists for a purpose. And it's the purpose which drives the business culture, where profit is needed to achieve the purpose, but not just for the sake of making money. And this SARS program is a great example how government framework helps and oversight and private sector speed and ability to scale up helps us to reach a goal in the shortest possible time. Now, we talked about industrialization, energy, we talked about the social sector. Here's another example that I want to bring up, which is something that people don't talk about when they talk about P3 or public-private partnership, and that's about developing a sports economy. It's the world of sports, right? And we just finished HBL PSL last night. Karachi won. Yes. So, yeah. You know, and this is a great model. While, of course, the model, the sports or the PSL model is not necessarily homegrown. It is taken from abroad. But see what it can do to the sports economy and how multiple players are playing a role once a platform is provided by the government to accelerate the development of sports and, of course, cricket. But it has the potential to develop a complete sports economy in this country using this model. So I do want you to talk about HBL PSL as well and let people know it's not just about industrialization, it's not just about social sector, it's about your physical health, it's about your physical entertainment, it's about world of sports as well.
Yeah, so thank you, Veqar. And I'll just pick up on the point that you earlier made as well, and it's a good segue into this discussion. It's from the business perspective, from private sector perspective, and a lot of organizations who are represented here, it's also giving back to the community, giving back to the country. I would add my congratulations to Karachi Kings, but I must admit I was hooting for Lahore Qalandars, so that's an admission. But in the end, you know, as I said last night as well, it's ultimately Pakistan who actually won in this whole thing. Listen, I mean, our discussion with PCB, the Pakistan Cricket Board, and HBL. I mean, this has been now a journey over the last 3 to 4 years. Again, comes back to the shared objective and the shared vision. One of the things was that we are a cricketing nation. You know, when we were going into this discussion, you know, the insights that we received was roughly 93% of us, I don't know what the balance 7% are doing, but the 93% of us either play or watch cricket. So it is a cricketing nation, right? And bringing international cricket back into the country was very much a common objective, a common theme. And number one. Number two, from our perspective, and again from PCB's perspective, where we all came together was our commitment to youth and talent development. And that's exactly what PCB has done and HBL has done in terms of finding new talent, and you saw some of that talent in action over the, you know, over the last year or so. So with this, you know, I think it was absolutely fantastic that we went through the finishing line last night. Obviously, earlier on in the year when we were all in the stadiums, the buzz, the excitement which was there. But the way this conference is being streamed, right? I mean, this is the new norm, right? I mean, millions of people saw that over TV. It was going through live streaming. But again, the discussion is when you have those shared objectives and common objectives, and then you trust each other, right? Because it's our mantra as well, Jahan Khab Wahan HBL. And again, from Mani Saab's as well, is the same thought process about enabling dreams and bring new and young cricketers into the game. And I was talking to Rana Jawad Saab, Lahore Qalandars owner, yesterday. And, the way these teams have gone and scouting, right, talent from all nooks of the country is just absolutely amazing, right? So again, PCB brought its own strengths and obviously their infrastructure and their expertise. And from our perspective, our network, our scale, and our shared vision, which is great to see that we could go through the finishing line last night.
Well done. And again, I'm picking up some of the things. Aurangzeb also spoke about the new normal. So new normal, many people take these extreme positions. New normal is all digital. New normal is all physical. I'm one of those who believe new normal is all about hybrid. So there will be a distinct physical world as has existed, but there will absolutely be a distinct digital world, and it's the combination of both which will become the new normal beyond COVID, and COVID has taught us that lesson, and I'm glad you brought up this subject. But you also brought about things like unearthing talent using public-private partnership. Think about PCB. Does it have the reach to go to the remotest of places and unearth the kind of talent that is coming up in the PSL? So P3 enables you to get to the talent which typically is not talked about. It also enables you to combine the purpose of the two organizations together. And I love when you said, while Habib Bank has a slogan of Jahan Khwaab Wahan HBL, but Mani Saab, the PCB, has a thinking around enabling dreams, how the two organizations' vision combined together, and that enables us to go back to the shared objective that we spoke about earlier. As we are approaching to the end, it can't all be hunky-dory, right? Yeah. We think P3 is a piece of cake now. We have done the industrial sector, we have done the social sector, we have done the world of sport, and Pakistan is absolutely the right market for implementing P3. Can't be this simple, right? So what are the don'ts of when you are venturing into P3? What are the things to be aware of? What are the things that may fail this entire model that one needs to be aware? And if you have some example with your experience internationally, that would be great to share with the audience.
Yeah, I think, if you look at internationally, and we have all, we travel around the world, and inshallah, post-COVID, we will start traveling again. But for me, one of the finest examples of public-private partnership, those of us who have been to India, would be the new Delhi and Mumbai airports. Absolutely fantastic piece of work in terms of the hardware and software, and it's very much public-private partnership at work. You mentioned UK earlier on, and the upgradation of London Underground, a profound failure in terms of public-private partnership not actually working. So ultimately, listen, it's just the flip side of all those things. These projects which go over budget, which are delayed way beyond the allotted time, and number of these projects ultimately getting shelved. And it's all about where people don't get onto the track with the same objectives in mind, a real disconnect between the partners and their own views and objectives and thought processes. And then the last thing is where we have seen a total disconnect and disrespect for each other in terms of decision making. Because when you have multi-year projects, it's almost by definition you're going to have ups and downs. And if you don't have that mutual trust and respect, you're bound to go your separate ways. And the moment you sort of go on that, the project is gone. So there are a number of federal projects which at times have gone the wrong way. There's some provincial projects which have gone the wrong way. But I would still say, Veqar, at the end of the day, that there's a huge amount of potential. And as we speak today, right, the housing and real estate, this Naya Pakistan Housing Authority, right, is a fantastic example again of how on a comprehensive basis, the public sector and of course number of these banks, we are now participating in the financing of these projects. Great potential there. I would say, again, tourism, there's a great potential. Sports, you have already mentioned, great potential. And I would say tourism and health. Again, two key areas going forward, which Pakistan can really capitalize on the public-private framework as we go forward.
Thank you very much. So don'ts should not deter us from doing the do's. And I think that's the key. So I said we covered multiple sectors. We covered what is needed to make public-private partnership work. And the key word that I picked two from your discussion, one is shared objectives. You've got to have a common cause, and you have all parties need to have commitment to the common cause. And two is make it a hygiene, make it a lifestyle to make sure that, as you proceed with this partnership, because these are typically long-term, 3 to 5 years, even more many a time. So there will always be a yo-yo kind of an effect in relationship, in thinking, and how you cover them through this mutual trust is going to be the key. Any final word from your side before we conclude?
No, I've already mentioned, Veqar, I think there's great potential here around various sectors. I think in earlier session, Dr. Hafiz was talking about, the budgetary allocations and the fiscal space. The reality is, we are going to remain on a tightrope with respect to government budgets and budgetary allocations. So the only way forward in terms of a step change in these various areas is where the private sector, embraces this concept and works very closely with the government to take things forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I hope the audience found the discussion insightful. Khalid Sahab, I was asked not to take questions, but yours I can't refuse.
Karachi is suffering from the lack of water availability, 565 million gallon per day of the shortfall, okay? Again, whether the same public-private partnership could be employed. Recycle of the wastewater, about 470 million gallon of water being drained into Arabian Sea. And lastly, from the escalation of third standpoint, the scalability, main thing is the third coal, gasification and liquefaction. So I encourage the financial sector to play their part. These are all capital intensive projects, and with their participation, I'm sure we will create more and more success stories. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I completely agree. We spoke about making this a lifestyle. I mean, the kind of opportunity that exists, and I gave some global figures from World Bank, and you gave the figures just from Karachi. Imagine the kind of waste, a country which is water scarce. If the electricity is not there, we don't have a way to, store the water, and it goes into the sea. And the only way we can go with speed is to make this a hygiene, make this a shared objective, make this a lifestyle. Government alone or private sector alone will not be able to achieve the objectives, as the examples I shared with BCG, McKinsey, as well as Harvard Business Review. On that note, thank you very much, all of you. Really appreciate your patience. You've been a great audience. Thank you for all the online viewers who have been listening to us. Keep listening. New power-packed panel coming up. Once again, sincerely appreciate. Thank you, Aurangzeb. Thank you so very much.